traditionally hotbeds were used to start seedlings, and you'd plant them really thickly and then you'd pull them apart and plant them where you wanted to. So that's what I did with my kohlrabi. None of these kohlrabi were originally planted there. They were all planted in this little clump over there by the onions. And so it worked fantastically. You can see that the Swiss chard is starting to come in really nice and thick. I'm not going to be transplanting them to other spaces. I will just be pick and come again and pick and come again. The one problem with this potting medium, which is peat moss with perlite, and then underneath there's rabbit manure, is that peat moss or coconut coir, whichever one you use, dries out quickly, and the surface of it forms a little bit of a crust, so it's hard to get more water in. I do have to water in here daily, but considering how warm it gets in here, that's not too bad. This time I waited 3 days in between, and you can see that some of the peas are a little distressed, and that the top of the growing medium is quite dry. But everything else looks pretty good. The more densely packed the growth is, the less you have to water because the shade keeps things from drying out. So here's my onions, my carrots, my radishes. Back there I have more kohlrabi, more onions. In here I have Swiss chard and spinach. Here I have sorrel and more Swiss chard. Here I have some bok choy, some tatsoi. Are you stuck? You're stuck. That is scary. Again, the ducks do really well in here, so there's that. I'm adding more all the time to the Hugel bed and then letting it sink. I have watered it in a few times and then it heated up really, really hot. So that was interesting. The layers, the bedding and then the carbon and then the bedding, then the carbon, it gets a lot hotter than the Strawbale does. And depending on what season it is, that's a good thing. If it's February, that's a good thing. The heat stays longer, but then you still got really cold nights. So at least in my climate, you still have to cover things, but then you have to worry that they don't get steamed out underneath that cover at night. This is what the perennial space is looking like. It's looking really good. Garlic and valerian, borage, sorrel. I think that's a beet. Pretty sure that's a beet, not a Swiss chard. Parsley, strawberries, kohlrabi, mullein, lemon balm. That might be astragalus, or it might be a Siberian pea shrub. I don't know. The purple is camas. This one here is self-heal. More spinach, strawberries. I'm trying some cabbages in the actual Strawbale, but I never really have much luck with that. And watch so closely for bindweed and kill it the second that it comes up. More self-heal, Arctic kiwi, comfrey, and then some flowers from the fresh pea, chives from the fresh pea. So it's all very exciting. So when I'm ready to plant, I just tip it one way or the other. It just holds up like that. Now the reason I'm going to come in here and plant is that the rabbit manure is not as close to the surface as it is on that one. You see all that has really good growth. Plants don't have quite as much fertilizer because it's just not as close to the rabbit manure. Now, the reason I have straw on here is because the peat moss will form a crust on the top, and also anytime I water, the peat moss will splash onto the plants. I think I might have put it on a little bit thick in some spots here. But I put it on thick over there as well. So I think it has more to do with the fact that the rabbit manure isn't as quite as close to the surface. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to plant some onions, just so that I have it completely planted rather than it being sporadic. The other thing that I've noticed is that on this one, with the bales lined up lengthwise that way, I've got more spacing here. And I do have plants dirt that is falling through. The other problem is that this grow box is too short. Like this one, there's plenty of space on all the sides so that the dirt's really held in. This one is just barely hanging onto the edge. So it is ending up wasting my dirt because my box is not as small as it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and plant some onions. Most of this is coconut coir. I'm not as tickled with it as I am with the peat moss. It's a little bit harder to get things into, so almost like it's formed a block. Now I did broadcasting in here as well as just lines of vegetables. I did both just to see what the difference would be. And sometimes the first planting doesn't make it, so you just make another planting. And that could be because of the frost. It could be because it didn't have enough fertilizer. You just don't know. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you go ahead and plant something else. It could be that your seed was old. And again, it just doesn't matter what the reason is. All that matters is that you just put something new in. Eventually the straw bale will mellow and start to decompose. And so regardless, it will do what you want to do. It just might take a little more time depending on the way that you set things up. Now this coconut coir came with some of those time release fertilizer bits. And I really don't think it's working as well as just having it in direct contact with the rabbit manure. The other grow box is sterile peat moss just with a really heavy dose of rabbit manure underneath, a very close dose, and it appears to be doing much, much better. Now if I see a spot where things are growing really well, I won't put an onion in. Just in spots where I feel like we're not really getting any progress. And I think I prefer to have it up high like I do in the greenhouse. It just eliminates any possibility of ducks getting into it. Like this one, the ducks got into the side and ate a lot of that dirt out, which is why the dirt ended up falling out, was because so much of it had been removed by the ducks. So this is where the ducks had been sticking their little heads through and eating the dirt up in there. And so even if it had been packed in really good and tight, the ducks being there didn't help anything. So I added this fencing here so they can't do that anymore. And I stuffed some lovage in the top to keep everything else from caving in. So here's this. I do have some onions that look okay that I've planted. And I could probably fill them in a little bit thicker there. I don't know if I want to.